Okay, welcome everyone to the Aspect Festival 2021. This is the Insight session, the state of research commercialization across the social sciences, arts and humanities. And we have three fantastic panelists today who I will let them introduce themselves, but we have James Kitson, we have Annie Thirlwell, and we have David I. And we're going to be talking about how research commercialization in the social sciences and humanities works at their institutions, what they've learnt, but also taking a kind of big macro level view as to how research commercialization in these areas fits into some of the big trends in the UK, like levelling up and other regional agendas. Now, before we start, a quick kind of couple of technical points. This is going to be basically a Q&A panel session. We're going to run for 60 minutes, but if you have a question, pop it in the chat during it and we'll pick up some of them. At 60 minutes, I'm actually going to be handing over to Andrew Wessel, who is an engagement manager at the Manchester International Festival and health researcher, and he's going to lead a sort of informal coffee networking opportunity for the final 30 minutes. There'll be lots of chance to chat with the panelists and each other during that point. But now we can get started. So maybe starting with James. James, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, no problem. Good morning, everybody. My name is James Kitson. I'm the head of commercialization at the University of York.
Annie, would you like to go next?
Yep. Hi, I'm Annie Thirlwell. I am Research Enterprise Manager for Arts and Humanities and Social Sciences, and also two research institutes at the University of Sheffield.
And David.
Sure. David I, head of LSE Innovation, in charge of commercialization of LSE's research results.
Brilliant, thank you. And what I would say before I start the questions is I've had the absolute privilege of working with all three panelists directly. And this is relevant because it's very much part of the value add of Aspect, which is because social science and humanities research commercialization is so new relative to STEM, we are all essentially starting from a very low base of understanding. And yes, you can attend sessions and that, but nothing beats working directly with your peers. And I've had the privilege of working with everyone here, both through the research commercialization community of practice, where we share lots of kind of knowledge and tips and presentations together to help understand, but also through the ARC Accelerator, where we've worked directly on each other's projects, which is a much faster way of learning, to be honest. So that's been absolutely great, and I'm sure we'll touch on some of that. But now we'll get cracking with the questions. So I want all my panelists to imagine the dark ages before Aspect, when the shining light of knowledge into social science commercialization wasn't really there. And my question is, what was the state of research commercialization in social sciences and humanities at your institution at the point that you joined Aspect? And let's start with David on that, because of course LSD founded Aspect.
Well, thank you. I think it's fair to say that LSE commercialization effort really was born about the same time when Aspect was actually being formed. And prior to that, there was no office dedicated to commercialization of research. And therefore, it was a brand new effort. And we were fortunate to receive massive assistance from Accenture, the consultancy. I see Sarah McNaughton also here in the audience, and really a big thank you to you guys. And we continue to receive the residual benefits of your earlier leadership. But it is true, I think, especially in the social science arena, relatively speaking, we have not received the same kind of attention as STEM. So, and I think that will be probably true across the board, just like where LSE really didn't have anything substantial before the founding of Aspect. And I suspect that other institutions, when it comes to social sciences commercialization, it was also quite a big void. So I was stopped just there to allow the others to represent their own institutions.
Brilliant. Annie, could you describe the void or not at Sheffield?
Yeah, there was a void, but it was really, so before I joined, arts, humanities and social sciences didn't have a dedicated commercialization manager. So my colleagues who were looking after the STEM focused faculties would usually pick up any expressions of interest from social sciences at that point. And they kind of just stayed on a Google Drive because nobody quite knew how to further develop it. And it was not through a lack of will. There certainly was a willingness, but no one quite knew how to go about it because I guess the commercialization managers looking after the other faculties, that's where their own research sort of backgrounds came from. So we generally have an engineer looking after engineering and so on. So yeah, there was not very much going on, and I guess it's a bit of a vicious circle, because if those faculties are not perceiving that there is support there, then they're probably not coming to bang on the door, with their ideas. So much as David just described, the implementation of sort of my role, I guess, immediately triggered some interest, but I suppose we'll come onto this later on the panel, but thereby, there were its own sort of challenges as well. But I think that the university, in recognising that it needed that support and having me dedicated to arts and humanities and social sciences, demonstrates their commitment to seeing things happen and making sure that this is brought along that kind of pipeline in the same way as my colleagues working on STEM projects.
Brilliant. And we will be touching on the kind of STEM versus social science and humanities commercialization theme. James, could you tell us a bit about York?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So York joined Aspect partway through the programme, and it roughly coincided with me joining York as well. So I joined York in March last year, and I came from Leeds, from the commercialisation team at Leeds. So it's been quite interesting, actually, because I came to York with a remit to kind of really reimagine what commercialisation in general was at York. It's activity that's been happening, but it could be more focused. So it's the first time there's been a dedicated commercialisation team in York for quite some time. So it's been nice timing for me to get into this side of things and the social sciences and what can be done, thinking about how we support this area at York, overall. There is stuff going on. There was stuff going on when I arrived, which was encouraging, which, looking at York University, we have 3 faculties. One is Faculty of Science, and as you might expect, most of the things that we see come out there. But we have, Faculty of Arts and Humanities and Faculty of Social Sciences. And actually, we have some social science activities going on in our science faculty as well, geography and psychology. So you might expect to see more stuff, but yeah, there was a bit of a void. So we don't have any spin-outs in this area, but we do have a couple of existing licenses from English from a while ago, which is interesting. And we do have some new early stage opportunities from arts and humanities, particularly music, language and linguistics. But it's interesting, they tend to be software focused. So we tend to focus more on them as a typical sort of STEM opportunity, because that's the obvious route. And then we have a couple of opportunities in social sciences, and one of which, Rob Klassen is on the call. We've been working on, through. I was working with Rob prior to the art programme, and obviously it's been part of the art programme as well. So there is things going on, but I think there's a lot more opportunity in York, and I think the timing's been really, really good for us here to be involved in this programme.
Brilliant. Well, picking up then on this theme of perhaps where the sciences and social sciences and humanities overlap or do not overlap, David, do you want to maybe talk a bit about what you think the difference are in the 2 approaches to commercialization?
Yeah, I think in terms of the structure, one thing that's immediately clear is that in the STEM area, a typical research laboratory will be supported not only by the PI, but also a number of PhD students, some postdocs, and maybe even a research manager of some sort. And therefore, there's a natural group of what you call maybe ECRs or even potential EIRs, entrepreneurs in residence, that you can actually work with. When it comes to SHAPE subjects, you usually don't have that kind of luxury. And the PIs or the main leading academics tend to develop their own research grant applications, and they tend to deliver the results all by themselves. And therefore, we're really missing that kind of a cohort or the kind of available pool of younger talents that we could tap into. And that is one thing. The other thing is on all the major campuses where STEM is a hot topic, you see a lot of professional investors, VCs, circling around. And by and large, the VC investment community has also organized itself into a very mature ecosystem. So you know that when you are approached by VCs, typically you only need to deal with a truly early stage, seed stage VC investors. And then later on, they will have to introduce the startup or spin-out companies to later stage VC investors. So there's a very well-established working order, if you will. When it comes to SHAPE, we are fortunate enough to have some investors interested in a SHAPE subject, but definitely not enough to form a critical mass or to form that kind of a very mature stage-wise pipeline. So we welcome them all, and their investments, also their investment theme will be quite diverse or very different from one VC or one investor to the next investor. So that is another very big difference. So in terms of our overall approach to follow-on funding support, we can't really be choosing very much. We're very pleased that anybody would talk to us at all. So that makes it sometimes interesting. Yeah.
And for those of you that may not remember the SHAPE acronym, which we're all propagating until it's really cemented in everyone's head, that stands for Social Sciences, Humanities, and the Arts for People and the Economy. So next time you hear SHAPE, that's what it means, and we're all staying on message. So let's move on to Annie then. So Annie, you talked about a Google Drive with all this knowledge tucked away in it. How have you found the difference between STEM and SHAPE commercialization at Sheffield?
Yeah, it's quite interesting actually, because obviously what I'm saying, I'm quite subjective in that I've never worked as a TTO or commercialization manager within a sort of STEM area, but my background before I joined the university was around digital technologies. So I think the difference between SHAPE and STEM for me is to be sort of comparing how my colleagues are developing projects versus how I have to develop projects. And very often within the STEM community, I think, and I am speaking very broadly here, I think very often things are developed with half an eye on the market already. They kind of know where the trajectory is for whatever it is that they're developing or they're creating. Because I think because STEM commercialization has been pretty well established across higher education now and within sort of research institutions, that I think within the STEM areas, they kind of know that that's an option for them. It's a given that is an option to explore. Whereas in social sciences, we're still, and arts and humanities, we're still trying to send that message that there is someone there to help support that. And I think it's also the difference between dealing with the tangible versus the intangible. So very much with sort of STEM projects, there is this very definitive product that, you know, we can touch and feel, and we kind of know roughly what the outcomes are going to be of using that piece of technology. With social sciences and arts and humanities, I see this, there's a huge front end of my role, which is helping the enthusiastic entrepreneurial researcher or academic to think about what this piece of research could potentially become, because that's just not something that's necessarily embedded within their thinking about their research traditionally and historically. So I see very much my role as helping them be this other creative mind, I guess with my background being external of the university, as to what this could be. And often what I have to do is look for inspiration. So I find myself going to the opening of envelopes sometimes, you know, across the city or the region, to kind of see other things that are going on and then linking it up to a piece of research that might be happening in one of my faculties and thinking, oh gosh, actually that's a really good idea. Let's work with that and try and see if I can transfer that piece of research and translate that piece of research into something which has been inspired by X that I've seen elsewhere. And also I think there's also a motivation in a lot of the STEM areas, in that I guess the number of noughts that are often applied to some of the commercialization opportunities are very different, and often the academics across arts and humanities, their motivations are to make a difference to our society and our culture, and that doesn't necessarily follow that there are lots of noughts that follow that. And also because, and again, I'm still speaking very, very broad terms, very often they're looking at how to contribute more to society by the application of their research. So they might be looking at different kind of models for what they want to commercialize, such as social enterprise or community interest companies and that kind of thing. So my boss, Andy, head of IP here at Sheffield, says I have the hardest job of all the commercialization managers, which I kind of like, because I like a challenge.
I think that's a brilliant point there about the importance of kind of building, I'm not quite sure what the word is, almost serendipitous networks, because if you're creating something hard IP like a molecule or a drug, it really only can commercialize in very specific contexts. It might not be easy to do it, but you know exactly where it's going to be. It's going to be the NHS or pharmaceutical or something like that. And I definitely feel that social science could go in a lot more directions, even if the research is deeply in depth, because it's a slightly more amorphous connection, which does mean you need better networks basically to help it commercialize. Now, James, new to the job, you came in, took control of York's research commercialization. What were your first observations on the differences between STEM and social sciences and humanities?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So, like I said, so a lot of some of the things that we had in the SHAPE area, you know, were software, were sort of tangible IP, and you know, so I created a sort of a process to set out how we were going to do commercialization, to communicate to academic colleagues. You know, it's a journey. You know, there's lots of decisions along the way, and you know, to help us manage opportunities. And of course, a lot of that is around how we think about IP, how we protect IP, you know, typically patents, and a lot of it was geared around that. And I put a caveat in the end of that process that said, but you know, some things don't fit this process perfectly, and things will change and things will jump around. And I kind of feel like a lot of the social science and arts and humanities stuff fits in that caveat box, that it doesn't quite, it might not quite fit the process, or at least, you know, things might skip a few steps. So, you know, an obvious difference is the IP, which you mentioned. So a lot of our work is focused on, can we protect this somehow, you know, via a patent or some other form of IP protection? You know, should we spend the money to do that? What's the commercial return on investment case, and so on? And SHAPE is a bit different. And yeah, having a network of people to help understand what that looks like and all the different routes is really key. And that's really the benefit I found in, you know, in Aspect and in ARC, is just seeing how we can do this. And, you know, and Annie, to your point around, you know, impact versus, you know, the amount of money, you know, what are we doing this for? You know, are we doing this to make money, or are we doing this for impact, or both? And it's an interesting question, again, particularly for me being new at York, because, you know, I come from a background of commercialisation where we prioritise, generally speaking, on will it make more money or not. You know, that was one of the key filters. You know, but here at York, you know, I've started to ask the question as a result of this, to say to our senior leaders, to say, what actually do you want from me? You know, do you want me to try and focus on a small number of opportunities that might return, you know, millions in the future, or do you want me to focus on a broader range of things? Do you want to actually not focus on money at all, focus on impact? You know, so it's really stimulated those conversations. So there are quite a lot of differences, and I think another difference that I'm thinking about at the moment is, you know, the spin out and licensing. So I think a lot of the things I've observed in shape areas naturally lend themselves quite well to a spin out, you know, or a staff startup or a student startup. But actually, how things that don't have much tangible IP that we can draw a box around and license out to somebody to take on and develop, you know, how do we do that? Is licensing something that we can do in this area? Is it something we should explore more, or is it just in that it doesn't really work and it's a too difficult box? I don't know, but you know, because we do license deals on, you know, STEM IP, you know, relatively all the time, you know, and that's very common and understood. But in this area, I'm not so sure that's common at all.
Well, I think you've picked up on a really interesting point there, though, James, which is that sort of shape commercialization doesn't fit necessarily within the traditional metrics of what we expect from the commercialization word in research commercialization. So I guess my question to you is, has having that conversation that, you know, you've been asked to support the social sciences and humanities, and that's a priority, changed how the university's approached and sees research commercialization in general? And also made the university reflect on really a quite profound purpose of why it does research. Starting with you, James.
Yeah, yeah, it started to happen. So it's interesting. The university didn't sort of say to me, right, we want you to do social science commercialization as well. It just, you know, it's just kind of happened, which is good. No one's telling me not to do it, so that's good as well. I'll take that as positive. But no, started to have conversations with the sort of pro vice chancellors for research and partnerships and so on, and they're very open to this, and it aligns with the university's mission quite well. The University of York's mission is University for Public Good, so I mean, it in that sense, it totally fits the university's mission. So there's an openness to really, you know, exploring this area in more detail. Of course, there's a resource question, so we're not fortunate enough to have an Annie who's dedicated to this area, and that's something I think about and would love to have. But it's starting to get people to think, and it's interesting because, as I said earlier, as I was brought in to kind of just sort of drive the whole commercialization agenda, it's a good time to start looking at this. It's not like I've got opportunity to do things a bit differently. So that's kind of what we're doing. But I suspect these conversations will continue for a while as we learn more as well.
Brilliant. Now, David, LSE did not have a long history of STEM commercialization, I think it would be fair to say. So how has research commercialization in SHAPE changed how LSE sees it?
Well, I think that as someone from about 30 years of industry experience in the STEM area myself, walking into this area, the immediate thing that I noticed is that in terms of the research commercialization model, we need to be more adaptive. And here we have relatively fewer, or you can say a lot fewer, ready to execute kind of research results, nicely packaged in some patents or patent applications, and where outsiders would actually come to us and say, we'd like to actually license that technology. Would you just, let's negotiate a licensing agreement. And that's what I used to do at other STEM leading universities. And here, we don't have that. and therefore we have to actually be more open-minded about how to effectively deliver commercialization. In this regard, we really define commercialization much more broadly than the STEM area. And here we will actually count consultancy as a very effective way to disseminate the research results. And also we need to count other forms of impact activities. If our faculty members end up consulting or serving on some government panel, some council, that will be very effective way to change the society in a way, or shape the society in a certain direction. So we need to be much more focused on those things. And the other thing is also true that in the STEM area, a lot of the leading academics are actually quite familiar with the entrepreneurship process. In fact, some of them are serial entrepreneurs themselves. They may not actually do startups themselves, but they have seen multiple postdocs or PhD that graduated from their lab doing such things. They have negotiated with VC players, they have been on company board of directors and all that. And therefore they come with a lot of experience. There's not as much of a need to help train or to disseminate information about what entrepreneurship really is and what all the challenges are, and try to give them some of the skills necessary. But here in SHAPE, we have relatively very few researchers that have any kind of a previous exposure, let alone experience to entrepreneurship. And therefore, that task becomes much more front and center. I'll stop right there.
Well, I think that's a very powerful point, because I think, as we all know, kind of, it's one thing for a university to make an opportunity available and tell it, but it's much more powerful to know that your peers have gone down that route. Researchers are nothing if not competitive. So having lots of peers is definitely the easiest way to get the ball rolling. Now, Annie, I'm kind of interested. Sheffield has long had a kind of role, I think, from what you told me about, a role within the Sheffield area and how the university kind of contributes to that. Did that make social science and humanities research commercialization an easier part of the university's strategy because of that fit?
Not particularly. I think in some respects it was a bit of a challenge because of the university's deep engagement at a localized level. There was this kind of given that we just work with people, and it's all very altruistic. And I'm definitely not here to put a blocker up to that at all. It sounds a cliche, but we really do see ourselves as a civic university, and we work very closely with companies and with organisations across Sheffield and the Humber. But I think with regard to the impact, I think what I think was perhaps quite a challenge, actually, now I'm talking this through, is that because our academics were so engaged, there were often great researchers and academics going off and working with companies and organisations, but it was not particularly formalised. So it was really hard for us to capture the impact that really would feed into me being able to support that. I guess my role at the uni for the first 12 months was almost like an engagement piece, just really not really concentrating on picking up a project, but really just going out and evangelizing for trying to promote an entrepreneurial spirit across the faculties. But we identified that a really good time to catch people was perhaps when they were doing their PhD, and trying to get them to think about their research in different ways from a really early stage. So recently I worked with the White Rose Doctoral Training Partnership with PhD students from York and Leeds and other northern universities, where I can't even call it a pre-incubator program. It was giving them that space to think about what their research could be if they were not to follow through an academic career, or if they chose to have create a business in parallel to an academic career. And we spent 6 weeks doing, I guess, a very low-key mini ARC. It wasn't by no means as detailed as that, but the results of that were quite phenomenal, in that people had no idea this was an option for them, and they'd never really thought of their research in that way, and the feedback was really positive. So and again, that is really fruitful for impact, and especially with KEF as well, you know, emerging. So very much our focus is around sort of the REF, KEF, and yes, if we can do something that generates, you know, in a financial way, all the better. That's the cherry on the cake. So that's, I guess, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn with my senior leadership group here, that I've got my own mission, but that's certainly, you know, that's certainly how it's been communicated, that's a process that they're supportive of.
Okay, brilliant. So now I'm going to put the panelists slightly on the spot, and I'm going to ask them, what do they consider the biggest barrier to research commercialization at their university? And because we want to just not just be problem focused, what's the single thing you would change in order to improve research commercialization at your university if you had a magic wand? So we'll start with Annie on that one.
Yeah, thanks very much. Right, gosh, the biggest challenge. I think one of the biggest challenges is actually the way that funding calls are produced around innovation. They're very often very STEM focused in themselves. They're looking for technological solutions. And it's very difficult. So if I could just backtrack a moment, I always evangelise about this, Chris, as you know. I'm a real advocate for human-centred design. I think people should be at the centre of anything that's developed. Any piece of technology cannot be effective without understanding context and what it's supposed to achieve for the human using it. But very often there are funding calls out there where technology is kind of the bottom line. They start with that. And so if I were to, I find that a real challenge, actually. And I received a survey from Innovate UK yesterday asking about engagement, and I completed it, and where I articulated this, that maybe they should be thinking around this a lot more. Sorry, what was the second part of the question? I forgot.
You have to wave a magic wand, change one thing.
I could change one thing. I think if I could change one thing, I would stop people thinking that creating an app would be their way to commercializing something. I find the majority of my work is dissuading people to, you know, just forget about the app. And this goes back to my previous answer, in that you've just thought in your head, I want to do an app. Actually, there are lots of challenges to creating an app, and then if all you've got there is content, there is no need for an app at all. So if I could wave a magic wand, it would be to erase people's minds of apps.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, we try not to use the word app anymore because I think investors are tired of it as well. James, biggest barrier and magic wand solution.
Yeah. I'm going to slightly cheat at this, Chris, and sort of talk about two things, but they're interrelated. So I think a big barrier at York is just a general awareness of commercialisation, what it is, why do we do it, and why would academic colleagues be interested in participating. So I think there's a definite piece there which we've started to address around communication and a cultural change really around this area. The second point that ties into that is resources to help for us to support academics, because at the moment we're very stretched, we're a very small team, and with what we have on the books, without doing any of that sort of awareness and promotion, we've got 150-ish live cases that essentially three and a half of us are working on, and it's a lot. And so if we go out there and raise the awareness and try and change the culture and say to people, hey, there's this great thing, if you're interested, we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot potentially when we can't deal with more things coming our way. And so the answer to that is, well, on the awareness side, is raising awareness. So we're really lucky. We have a relatively new Pro Vice Chancellor for Partnerships and Engagement, Kieran Trahan. She joined the week after I did, so she's similar timescale to me. And she's really focused on this cultural change in York. And we're going to be launching a new Institute for Enterprise soon, which is going to be for staff and students and the wider community, really pushing entrepreneurship, of which commercialisation is a part. So that's really good. So I feel like the university as a whole is getting behind this. But my biggest challenge then is, how do we resource ourselves to support that effectively? Because someone, me or somebody in my team, now trying to manage 30, 40, 50 individual opportunities is not that effective, when, particularly I think in this area as well, we require a lot more, it requires you to work very closely with the academic team, spend a lot of time and develop your thinking. And so to have the space to do that is really key. So, my current challenge, which I am working on, is trying to, put the case forward to support this area more, which is difficult at the current time. Hopefully we're coming out of the COVID crisis, but there's still financial considerations and concerns, as there always is. COVID or no COVID, it's not, there's no magic money tree, as in the university as there isn't anywhere else. So that's the big challenge I think we've got.
Brilliant. And maybe a quick follow-up then, just because you mentioned it. What is the aim of this new kind of cultural change program, to basically see more entrepreneurs, among other things, in the research community at York?
Yeah, essentially to be more entrepreneurial and be more enterprising. Staff and students, and like I said, the wider community. So it has an internal focus and an external focus to help support the York region and beyond, and help us support businesses. So the other thing York is very focused on is contributing to the city region and helping the city region grow and be more entrepreneurial, and that's something the city is very keen on as well. So it's not as such to drive commercialisation activity, but it's to drive that culture of this is something that we think is a good thing to be thinking about. It's not for everybody, obviously, but there's probably more people, like Annie was saying, getting people to think about what are your careers going to look like if you don't go down the research path. It's that sort of thing. It's supporting that mindset and giving people opportunities.
Brilliant. So David, biggest barriers and magic wand solution at the London School of Economics and Political Science.
Oh, well, thank you for spelling out the whole name. Yes, at LSE, I think the biggest barrier will be very similar to what James and Annie have already mentioned. That is academic engagement or awareness. And that internally, I think, if you look at the awareness, you could probably look at it in two parts. One part is internal, the other part is external. Internally, it is academic engagement. And I totally support James' earlier statement, and also Annie mentioned it as well, that when we're trying to cultivate the term commercialization compatible research, because I think a lot of times academics don't really necessarily think of commercialization. They think that has nothing to do with them. Or worse yet, they think commercialization might be an obstacle to their pure academic pursuit of something that's more pure, that is not polluted or contaminated by monetary motivation. What we're trying to say is that, first of all, as I mentioned, we are looking for impact, not just the monetary outcome. And therefore, they cannot disagree with us that it will be better if the research could generate deeper and wider impact. And to that extent, being able to shape the economic activities in the society will be considered a good thing, not a bad thing. And what we're trying to do is make sure that the research activities will be compatible with downstream, commercialization activities. And they will not do some things when they sign any kind of external research agreement, collaboration agreement, data access, data sharing agreement. They don't end up actually blocking a future path to commercialization. So that is one thing that we're trying to encourage. And overall, the academic engagement is still that they're not quite aware of our existence and the usual challenge. But when it comes to the external part of the awareness, I think it was James that mentioned to the external community, we need to promote more of a networking effect. And at this point, a lot of the people outside LSE would not know how to engage with LSE if they wanted to seek some kind of a collaboration. They may not be very clear in terms of what form of a collaboration work might be possible, but they have a general notion. So we're working very hard with our business engagement, corporate engagement function, with our alumni office and all of that, trying to not only see ourselves as connectors, but also as builders of those informal networking groups, connecting our research communities with outside user communities. Now, you asked the question of one magic wand to especially the funding bodies. That will be simple. Put the money where the mouth is. So where we really need help, I think, are at least in two areas. One is human capital, the other is capital, money capital. So the human capital wise, I think we can all recognize that, for example, with ARC Accelerator, it's great that we're asking all these academic leaders to find early career researchers, sort of the junior level people to be engaged. But what we have found at LSE is that we have a more long-term need. So it will be great for ARC to have identified several ECRs related to ARC projects, but we have other projects that are not in ARC, and also even with the projects that are in the ARC Accelerator, after the accelerator session, the cohort is finished, we still need to have the same kind of people, the same kind of recruitment system, and to be able to actually have the ready-made talent pool, if you will. These are the junior people who are already naturally interested in this kind of stuff and have been exposed to some of the entrepreneurial processes, and we can actually turn to them whenever we have a good project that needs some support. And therefore, if the funding body will actually fund the development, recruitment, and retention of such ECRs or EIRs within the SHAPE subject area, I think that will be very helpful. The other is money is capital. It will be fantastic. I think, Chris, we brainstormed earlier to encourage the formation of maybe an evergreen fund, VC fund, dedicated to the early stage investments in SHAPE spin-out companies. I think across the board, that would really make it so much easier for us to work with a leader in the VC industry dedicated to the SHAPE commercialization. And this is different from just the social enterprise. A lot of so-called social impact investors, they actually end up investing in STEM areas that happen to have a social impact outcome. That is different. What we're talking about is a start with a SHAPE, a social science, arts community subject matter, and then trying to commercialize the research results in these subject matters. And that will be a fantastic way to support the SHAPE commercialization.
Oh, well, that was brilliant because it preempted my next point, which is basically, looking at the financing for such ventures. I'm going to go to Annie now and ask, have you encountered the same problems with financing, or do you envisage the same problems? And if so, what, if anything, are you looking at to try and overcome the financing gap?
Yeah, I think we're very lucky at the University of Sheffield. We do have an internal funding pot that it's a little like Dragon's Den. I still have to go through all that hard work of making sure that there's a sound business model and there's cash flows, and it's very rigorous, and there's a panel of external people as well, so it's not just all internal, which can, you know, stimulate that very sort of early stage next progression for some of the projects. I think, as David and James have both touched upon and gone into as well, I think there's a big piece of work around educating, for want of a better word, or certainly alerting external businesses to the value of social sciences within development of products and tech, and how much value these kind of insights from these two areas can bring. But it's eternally tough when you've when you have you know, there is a political agenda that actually focuses on STEM at even the point of education and early years education. That is potentially quite problematic. It kind of is shaping how society will value things going forward, I think. So I think we need to kind of address that now. I don't have the answers, I wish I did. But I think, I think more of a push towards the understanding of social sciences within a larger project. I know we don't like to use the word bolt-on, but I don't see it as bolt-on, I see it as essential. Social sciences, arts and humanities as an essential part of any development kind of project for, you know, anything before. I'm going down the whole human-centered design thing again, so I shall stop there.
Well, no, that actually brings us on neatly. We've got a fantastic question from Saskia, which I'm going to slightly tweak, which is, how should we measure the benefits and success of social science and humanities ventures when they don't always prioritize profits to the same extent? And I guess the follow-up bit to that question is, how are your universities measuring these ventures, or intend to measure them? Should we start with James on that one, that tough one?
Yeah, well, it's tough, and it isn't. I suppose in simple terms, you know, we measure it by impact, and you know, as a university where, you know, I say we, colleagues of mine, you know, are employed to do just that, and, you know, generate and measure and monitor impact. So in that sense, it's relatively straightforward. But, you know, trying to communicate the actual value of that back to the university, other than just, oh, we've got some good impact metrics which we submit, you know, through whatever processes every year. You know, what does that actually mean for us? What tangible benefits does that bring back? And that's the key thing to capture. You know, does that mean we're more engaged with society, and it leads to more collaboration and future projects? And if so, well, what were they? And you know, did that increase our research, you know, agenda, or whatever it is at York? And I think that's something we do need to think quite a lot about. And again, it comes back to what I was saying earlier around what do the senior leaders in the university want out of this? You know, because if they want to see something, then we'll start, you know, we'll start monitoring and measuring that, as opposed to prove to them that it's happening or not. So I think it's an emerging area for us at York anyway. I don't know if, you know, Annie and David, maybe a bit more detail on that side of things from your side.
Yeah, David, how's LSE thinking about this?
I'm not sure that we have a unified thought about this, but rather, when you look at the different subject areas, different issues that our spin-out companies are trying to address, you will recognize the full spectrum of diversity. And it is really, really challenging. Other than doing some simplistic measurement, of course, just like in the STEM area, you could say, well, let's measure by the financial performance data, which is typically what people will go to because it's easier to get, and everybody understands the value of dollars or pounds. But that is often missing a major point. For example, we have, if you want to measure the scope and the level of impact, different projects tend to have their different metrics, and it's often not quite fair to compare them across. I'll give you one example. We have a brilliant academic, Professor Bruder, whose research is in democracy and how to enhance engagement in democracy amongst the voters. So he's working with several democracies around the world, and you could claim that, hey, for each democracy, let's just count the number of voters this potentially could touch, and that will be a huge number. So is it fair for him to then say, or for us to claim through that project, our impact as a number of voters that we touched? That will be mind-boggling. Okay, a very, very huge number. And versus maybe someone else whose research results would impact a particular government body and a particular small subject matter, and you will have a very, very deep impact in all the clients within that service program, but the total number is not that great. So I do think that we need to avoid falling into the pitfall of having one measurement across the board to measure the potential impact, especially in ranking them. It is a rather dangerous concept. We have been the victim of one size fits all kind of measurement across all the different disciplines, and where we in the shape arena, we feel we hold the short end of the stick. Now, internally, when we look at all the shape subject matters, we probably should not repeat the same mistakes across all the shape disciplines.
I think it actually touches on a slightly profound point, which is in general, we as societies measure sort of overall progress through GDP growth. We basically reduce everything to single financial metric. And what we're trying to do with these spin-outs is something quite different, which governments haven't managed to do with considerably more resources. So we're slightly swimming upstream there. What I want to do is slightly pivot at this point to kind of touching on that national issue. All obviously parts of the UK economy are following our dear leader Boris Johnson's focus on levelling up. And that's obviously a major part of the government's initiative. And what my question to the panelists would be, how, if at all, is social science or SHAPE research commercialization contributing to levelling up agenda in your region? We'll start with Annie as one of our northern partners.
Thank you. First of all, I mean, if I dare say, I mean, let me quantify levelling up. First of all, I mean that it's it's a concept that I don't think we understand. The reason behind it, but kind of how that actually comes to fruition, I'm not quite so sure. I think this comes back slightly to the previous question around impact, in that I guess, so with a lot of the work that I do, it kind of starts on quite a localized level, and as it progresses, we see how that can kind of grow. So it's almost as if like we work perhaps, with the KE teams where we do these, match funded kind of projects where we're almost piloting, from my perspective, we're almost piloting an idea where it could have this localized impact. And and then we either say, wow, yeah, I mean, what a difference this has made to this particular part of society, or this particular community, and how can this be scaled up, and how can this be rolled out further. I think maybe so, because this does slightly touch upon, from my answer anyway, on the previous thing, I sit next to our impact team when we're in the office. Obviously that's not happened for 18 months. I sit next to the impact team, and it's very much a transactional way of working. The impact team might go out and speak to someone and then say to me, did you know this person's doing this? And I go, no, that's amazing. And I pick it up. Or it could be that I speak to the impact team and we talk about what that impact should be. And ultimately what the impact should be is a demonstrable change. But as David said, it can't be a one size fits all, because it can be at policy level, it can be huge levels with individuals or groups of people or large communities. So it's very individual. Yeah, you have to be very individualistic. I can't even say it, sorry, around how you approach this, even at a localized level. I'm a little skeptical around the whole levelling up agenda. I'd like to think that's a priority for them, but we'll carry on regardless doing what we're doing. I think we've always done pretty well, and see if it falls within their definition and remit of what that might be.
Brilliant. James, the perspective from your...
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, I kind of agree with what Annie says. What does it mean? What is levelling up? We have the same thing with Northern Powerhouse. Maybe I was just missing something, but I didn't fully get exactly what it meant in detail. But fundamentally, if we're creating new opportunities, based on social sciences that are spinning out, we're creating jobs, stimulating the economy. That seems to fit and seems to be a good thing. But if it means actually what we want is lots of really high hyper growth type Silicon Valley tech companies, and not social enterprises that might grow slightly slower and never quite reach that same level of financial power, as it were, then it doesn't quite fit. But I think fundamentally it must fit in there somewhere. So I think, like Annie said, understanding the detail would be useful. But I think we keep going anyway, and it's a new area, and I don't think there's any reason why we shouldn't. So.
Brilliant. Well, I'm going to give our panelists one last question before we go into our sort of breakout chatty section, and that is, what would success for Shape commercialization look like in 5 years' time for you? And we'll start with David for that one.
Well, I think that it will be fantastic for us to look inside and outside for that answer. In looking at inside, I think if we could see very vibrant community formed amongst our academic researchers, as well as our students interested in pursuing entrepreneurship, somehow connect the two subgroups and have a very vibrant overall entrepreneurial community within LSE, that would be fantastic. And looking outside, if we could also see evidence of either industry or government sector overall users of our potential research output, they know exactly how to engage us, and that there also is a group of, if you will, special interest groups of some sort, being formed. They don't have to be very formal in any way, but there is a very natural interaction on the weekly basis. People understand, from the user community or from the society's perspective, what they need us to do as researchers. And our researchers would also understand, here's my research output. I know exactly who to approach amongst the user community to try to maximize my research impact. I think if we could actually see the evidence of both communities forming, that will be very satisfying.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with that. James, what about for you? What would success look like 5 years down the road?
Yeah, I think it's fairly simple in that it's, we just see there's more commercialization activity going on in this area, and we have more outputs, and they're generating impact, whatever that impact is, how we decide to measure it and quantify it. And also we see, a broader range of UK universities and global universities engaging in this. So it's not just the partners that are involved in the Aspect programme today, but it filters out across the higher education world.
Absolutely. Annie?
I think success for me personally would be to see a social sciences agenda at the centre of the sort of innovation calls. That would by its nature make sure that social sciences has a fair crack at actually really testing and demonstrating how important it is, and how keen the community is to engage with this kind of activity, and also to, I guess, for want of a better word, co-opetition between universities. I mean, the ARC programme and the Aspect community, where there's all coming into one room together, has been really powerful, I think, in seeing those strides being taken. And so, yeah, I would say, this big collective drive where universities come together, and also with the innovation policy end of things, funding end of things, ensuring social sciences is really part of any development opportunity with industry.
Thanks very much, Annie. And I guess just my concluding thoughts just on Annie's last point would be, yes, it's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario we're in, where we need to generate the examples of shaped commercialization so that other partners in the ecosystem, be that research councils, commercial partners, supporting partners, and indeed the academic community, understand what it means so that they can do it and support it. And that's basically Aspect is almost like a coordination approach to that, by pooling everything together and trying to learn really fast. So I think that's a very positive note to end on. Thank you to all our brilliant panelists. I think that was a really wide-ranging discussion, everything from the levelling up agenda down to how do we measure impact at a spin-out level. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to hand you over to Andrew, who is going to lead our more sort of coffee, I call it a coffee breakout session. But I'd just like to thank everyone, and especially the panelists, for an absolutely fantastic and highly informative discussion.